Hello, everyone. I am excited to bring you the lovely Hanna Jane Price today. Just giving everybody a minute to log in for us to do our Leading with Authenticity talk. Coming after International Women's Day, I feel like this just happens to be one of those wonderful timing moments where we're going to have a great chat with Hanna. Hi. So I haven't seen Hanna in a few months, and I thought it would be good for me to maybe share a little bit about how we met. So what I'll do is I think I'll introduce Hanna first, and then I'll tell my story and then hand it over to you. Sounds good, Hanna?
Great, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Interesting. My name is Deslin Wood. I'm the Chief People Officer at Thoughtexchange and, a fairly frequent virtual event host. And so excited to get a chance to speak with Hanna. And if anytime during our talk you want to speak out on LinkedIn or tweet, these are the hashtags that we would like you to use if you're tweeting or LinkedIn tweeting. And our talk is with the lovely Hanna. So normally I'm not a big bio reader, Hanna, but I really liked your bio. So you're just going to have to listen to it. I know it's awful to listen to your own bio, but I'm going to do it. So Hanna's an HR pro, but like the cool kind, or so she hopes. So I hope too. With experience in media and film, hospitality, and event production, Hanna's approach is to blend process with fit, nurturing the best of each culture and creating opportunities for leaders and organizations to flourish, even if that means speaking the inconvenient truth. Hallelujah to that, Hanna. Currently the Director of People and Culture at This Is Blueprint. Her role encompasses organizational development, leadership coaching, employment relations, and everything in between. And anybody who's in HR knows that that's a very vast amount of things. So how did Hanna and I meet? Well, she was attending one of our live TE Transform Connect events in Vancouver in the fall. And one of the things we do in our live events is we have a lot of different speakers and panels and, roundtables. It's really interactive. But how we close the day is instead of having somebody that we brought in or an external thought exchange person speak, we actually run an exchange. And during that exchange, we ask everybody in the room if they have a story they want to share, to put it in our exchange, and then everybody who's participating votes the story that they want to hear to close out the day. And the one that popped up, because I know I gave it 5 stars, was everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So this voted right up to the top, and Hanna got up there and she just closed out the day with this beautiful story. And we felt it would be pretty exciting for us to share that with the larger public today. So with that introduction, Hanna, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see you. And let's tell us about your story, about everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks, Des, for that great introduction. I'm so excited to be talking with you guys today and with the audience. I don't know who's out there, but hi. I have been in HR for nearly 20 years, which is shocking. And I've seen a lot of change in this practice, in this profession. And it's being driven by really fearless people. And I would not have described myself as fearless my whole career, but something happened that really got me to tap into that part of my being. And that was that I attended a charity boxing event back in 2015, where a friend of mine was raising money for a gym on the east side of Vancouver for specifically for programming for kids who otherwise may not have opportunities in sport. And, any boxing movie, any sort of narrative you've heard about boxing is pretty accurate. It's a place where a lot of people end up because they don't really have anywhere else to go. Anyway, I saw this boxing event and I was inspired. It caused me to think really hard about how I was spending my time. I had been a fairly enthusiastic team athlete as a young person. I played rugby, I played soccer, and I let it all go because work was everything. Being there for everybody was absolutely everything. And I thought, maybe it's time to do something for me. So I started training. I started training in the middle of the dark, like 5 a.m., 6 a.m., because I was not very fit. I was really quite embarrassed, and I held a lot of shame about how I had allowed that part of my life to disappear. And month by month, scale visit by scale visit, things started to change for me. And at the Thought Exchange event back in fall, I talked a lot about how it changed me physically. And as I was speaking at this impromptu keynote, I realized just how much it changed me emotionally and how I was able to let go of a lot of the BS that people carry around with them, that I definitely carried around with me. Who I thought I should be, what I thought I was going to look like when I finished this journey. I hate that word, by the way. I found myself in the middle of a boxing ring fighting a woman who is still one of my best friends to this day. What's up, Sarah? I know you're watching. And discovered that, you know, there are worse things to do than to put yourself out there. There's no hiding in a boxing ring. There is absolutely nowhere to run. Once you're in there and you're going to get hit, and you're going to have to hit somebody else, which I have to say is actually the scarier of the two things that happen in that ring. You're relying on your training, you're relying on catching a lucky break, your fitness, your cunning, and you're taking some risks, and you're stripped kind of bare in there, and you've got 900 people maybe chanting your name, maybe chanting your opponent's, but you're in there until the bell goes, so you make the best of it. We raised a lot of money. I boxed for 3 years with this amazing organization in Vancouver called Aprons for Gloves, supported the Eastside Boxing Gym, and continue to do so to this day. It changes not only the lives of the kids who benefit from the programs, but every single person who goes through the charity boxing event. I've met my best friends through it. I've seen people transform their lives, and I can't recommend it enough. I know it sounds crazy to say, hey, go get punched in the face, but it really was very transformative.
So how do you think that whole experience of being in a ring, I love that you said something about taking the hit isn't as hard as being the one delivering the hit. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that and how that relates back to you as yourself as a leader in your everyday life.
I think it, you know, as a woman, as a girl, you're taught to be very accommodating of others. I think we get socialized. I mean, my parents were pretty feminist, but we were still socialized to make things easier for other people, to not inconvenience other people. And there's a dark side of that, which is that you almost never consider yourself in that conversation or in that transaction. You can also be, you can be doing harm to people by not telling them the truth. So while you're in the ring, you're physically clobbering somebody else, and it takes a lot to overcome the social conditioning of causing physical discomfort or pain to somebody else. But the translation that I've made of that experience is, you're not always going to be able to make somebody happy, but you've got to be honest. You've got to show up for them. One of my dear colleague, who also went through Aprons for Gloves, hi Benita, says it all the time. Feedback, giving somebody that information it's your choice about when you share it. It's your choice about where you share it, but it's theirs. You're just hanging on to it for them. To give somebody feedback in a way that is empathetic and honest and right from your heart to theirs is to enable their growth and their development. And so that's sort of where that sprang from, and where that very viscerally sits with me, is that, you know, it may not translate for everybody that punching somebody in the face is the same as giving feedback. But because of our conditioning, it can feel like that sometimes. People are so scared to be honest with one another.
Hi, Hanna Jane. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you doing, Anya?
Good. I've been listening along, and I'm just really excited because I also box. I'm a kickboxer.
Oh, cool.
Exchange. So I'm like, I know that quote. I got that quote at trivia night one night.
Sweet.
Yeah. So I'm really enthusiastic. I have a lot of questions for you.
Oh, great. Fire away.
So yeah, because I've noticed as well what you were talking about in terms of that confidence and that ability to bring your stance to your work. And I think that there's a few things I'd love to chat with you about boxing in particular, about what that martial art does with regard to communication. So do you want to just talk about a little bit about where your feet are when it comes to boxing?
Where my feet are, like literally?
Yeah, like what's your stance?
Okay. So for all the non-combat sports people out there, I'm a bit of a weird one, Anya, because I am naturally a southpaw. So naturally, my strong hand is my left hand. But I've learned how to stand in an orthodox position as well. Regardless, the boxing stance is very much you're facing your opponent, your arms are in, your feet are quite far apart. Sort of when you first start, it's unnaturally far apart. But you realize that no matter which way you have to move, whether you have to, you have to sort of, head movement was not my strong point. I will say that now. But when you have to avoid a punch, whether you're rolling, whether you're slipping, your feet are it's sort of a stability triangle. If you end up having to squat down, there's going to be no wavering back and forth. Nothing is going to knock you over. And I think, Anya, you've made a really good point with the analogy here, is that when you know where your feet are, you have knowledge and confidence in your own strength, your own argument, your own passion point. There's not much that's going to knock you over, but you do have to move. Because if you don't, you're going to get hit in the face. And Sarah, Benita, I know you're both very aware of this. It's actually not that hard to hit me in the face in boxing. It's a lot harder to hit me in the face metaphorically at work. You've got to kind of move. You've got to kind of dance with your opponent. It's the sweet science. There's there are, as I said, a canon of films made about this sport. It's brutal and it's beautiful, and it's about rooting yourself where you need to, getting it done, and then moving. It's called the stick and move. And I think, communication in our worlds, in our work, in our relationships, in our families, it's a little bit the same. You're not necessarily trying to hurt the other person. You're trying to protect yourself, get your point across, take some risks, put yourself out there, and know that even when you do get a knock, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I love everything you said, because it really relates to me when I think about not only communication, but leadership, about having that stance and having that ability to not get knocked over, but also just know where you are and not get backed into a corner. So I see Des is joining us again. Des.
Oh, for God's sake. You have to love live events. So for all of you out in BE land, my computer's been doing that last couple of weeks, and I'm getting a new one now, like it's on the Pure Later truck, and evidently an hour too late though. So, Anya, you're lovely. Thank you so much, and I'm just happy to have all of us ladies here on there. So continue, and I'll be ready for the exchange.
Thanks, Des.
No, I'm happy to step off as well. I just thought I'd jump in because it was International Women's Day, and I'm so thrilled that we have a strong female leader who also just shares a passion for a sport I love. So thank you so much, Hanna Jane. I'll hand it back to you, Des.
All right. So you know what? That's what you got to love about anything that's a technical situation, is that you're guaranteed to have always some surprises. So what we want to do next is we want to have an exchange where anybody online can now participate and ask Hanna some questions. And so I don't want to take up any of her wonderful time. I'm just going to get that link going and share my screen. So the point here is for us now to ask questions for Hanna that I'm really excited to see. So if you haven't joined a Thought Exchange before, you just hold up your phone like I am to the QR code, or you can go to tejoin.com and put in this 9-digit number. And when you're holding up your phone, you don't take a picture. You just hold up the camera like I'm showing right now, and then you just click on the little pop-up, and it'll take you to an exchange. And we're going to give you a couple of minutes to ask some questions or thoughts, or share your ideas with Hanna, and then we will answer them. And again, I apologize for the technical problems. So I'll give you a moment now.
I'm just glad you're back, Des.
I'm glad to be back. Yeah. Those 2 minutes were really long for me. All right, I'm going to share some questions too. So here we go. And Hanna, feel free to join the exchange just to watch the questions, and I'll put them up on the screen in a minute.
All right.
So Hanna, I hope you're having a chance to see these questions as they're coming through.
Some tough ones.
Yeah, let's start with the top one for now. And if anybody wants to continue rating, please do, or continue sharing questions. I'd be very happy for that. So how has the training for boxing influenced your training strategies in the workplace?
Wow. Well, I don't know if it's directly related to boxing, but I've certainly become more don't know if if resilient is the word, but definitely working hard to shed my all or nothing mentality. When I started boxing, my assumption was I was going to have the body of a Grecian goddess in 6 months. I was going to stay forever young and nothing was going to hurt. And it was all going to go according to plan because I could control it. Large intrinsic locus of control over here. Training in the workplace. When I moved to This Is Blueprint 2 years ago, I had never supported a hospitality organization. I was making maybe some gentle assumptions about how I was going to introduce some new concepts as their kind of first person in this role. It was a role created when I came on board. And you know, there are lots of sort of cliches I could lean on, you know, get knocked down 7 times, get up 8, that kind of stuff. Some of my plans didn't work. Some of them worked in ways I wasn't expecting. And some of them kind of took on a life of their own, and other people became champions for certain initiatives, notably the values conversation that we started last year and cemented in the fall. So if I were to draw it back to boxing, it's like things aren't always going to work out the way you expect, but it doesn't mean that it didn't work. To try things again, to try different angles, to repeat the same thing twice and see what happens. To not do it alone. Boxing feels like a solitary sport, but you are training alongside people day in and day out. You're not the only one experiencing the same thing. So leaning on the expertise around you, asking a lot of questions, being endlessly curious about what makes people want to learn and want to be drawn to new ideas, and kind of rolling with the punches. Again, another cliche. Sometimes things don't work out, and it doesn't mean you take your gloves and you go home. It means you try again. So being a little bit resilient about it.
If I remember now, I missed the last end of the story due to my things. I remember you when you told the story live that you didn't win the match.
Oh no! Oh, I got my butt handed to me.
How is that something transformational about your leadership in terms of what happened there and all that prep and then not winning? Like, how did that whole thing impact you?
My ego was pretty bruised. I'm not gonna lie. I would categorize myself as somebody who does things that she knows she's good at. I think that's a pretty common reality for a lot of us. We don't venture into things that we think we have a high risk of not succeeding at. Not winning didn't mean anything. I would never take away the victory from my opponent. She was excellent. She's still a far better boxer than I am. We do pad work together quite often. The process of going through the training was the victory. The journey, again, the word that I hate, was learning more about what I'm capable of in the training than I was in the ring. The average training session was 90 minutes long. So 90 minutes of cardio with tons and tons of strength training. I was in the ring for 3 minutes. So, you know, the real education, the real experience was in the gym with people skipping rope for 30 minutes at a time without stopping. Being the one with your arm up at the end of it was what I'd imagined, but it didn't take away from the rest of the experience at all. And that's, I guess, translating that into the working environment. Things may not always go exactly as you plan, but if you've gone through the process properly, and if you've included people in on that process, you will be further along than you were when you started.
I love that metaphor. I'm just like noodling on it, of this idea of the 90 minutes of training sessions over and over for 3 minutes in the ring. And this idea in our world that we spend so much more time focusing on the 3-minute moments than all the other moments. And then we make those moments be, you know, this idea, this paradigm of winning and losing, or number one and number two, as if all the work ahead of time didn't have its own lessons. Yeah. The focus is just on that final moment. And maybe that's why people are so intimidated, because they think that that's all that counts. And I think that's such a thing about development in people, is that what counts is all the things that happened before that moment, and that moment itself is not as important, but it is given this importance by the world. There was a comment lower down that I thought Brene saying about Brene Brown, that it was mentioned in our talk that you were going to reference back. Do you feel like any of that learning or that, you know, a connection between what she talks about being in the ring? I think she talks about the arena.
Brene came into my life after my boxing was over in terms of the actual match preparation. But I read 3 of her books back to back, more or less. I went to the bookstore. I bought her first book thinking, oh, I've heard of this person. Maybe I should read it. Read it in an afternoon and drove straight back to the bookstore to get another one. So yeah, she speaks to me in a way that I'm sure resonates with a lot of the people watching today. Yeah, you know, it's kind of that Navy SEALs model, or whoever, maybe it's Special Forces in the UK, who dares wins. Like, just getting in the ring means that you're gonna get hurt. No boxer comes out of the ring without having been punched in the face, whether they got the medal or not. But just getting there was the victory. And I did it 2 more times. It clearly didn't put me off. The practice of discipline and endurance and resilience and like knowing full well that my first experience was not victory. My second was. And then my third, not so much. So batting 1 for 3, I still wouldn't have exchanged a minute of it for something else. I learned so much about how I show up when I'm tired, how I show up when I'm feeling like things are going well. Just it brought a whole level of self-awareness. And when I translate that to how I show up with my colleagues here, I'm more aware of the energy that I can bring into the workplace than I would have been if I hadn't gone through this.
So I'd love to dig in, but I'm going to let the questions go instead of hijacking all of them myself. What other transferable skills do you see in between boxing and being a woman in leadership? Beyond having a strong stance and being on the move, what other thoughts or advice do you have?
There will always be a point when you want to give up. You're just so tired of being, you know, that I think the expression is being the tip of the spear. I find myself at the age of being the most senior woman at this organization. By no means the most experienced woman at this organization. And it can be a grind sometimes, because you know, I watched Elizabeth Warren's concession speech this week, and it really resonated. You know, if you pull the woman card, you're a whiner. If you don't acknowledge that there is a difference, then a bazillion women behind you go, what? How could you not? I'm really grateful to work with a group of people who, for whom there isn't an overt difference, but I also represent a profession that is largely represented by women. Human resources is dominated by women in the workplace, and it sometimes gets labeled kind of fluffy or soft. Boxing gave me the kind of the cojones, as it were, the street cred sometimes to show up as somebody other than, you know, classic like tea and Tampax. I'm not here to be everybody's counselor. I'm here to make sure we're looking at things from 100,000 feet. What is our strategy? Like people are sick of me asking that question at this business. Okay, but what's your strategy? And I think that's where boxing gave me the confidence to stand up and say, hey guys, we need to have a conversation about this, and know that it's not gonna be shouted down because of maybe some self-fulfilling prophecies about being the girl in the ring.
Well, those are really, it is, and you're apropos, you're right about the Elizabeth Warren talk. I mean, you mentioned what it was like to raise your hand, to have the concession. And again, is that what defines you? Is it that moment, or is it everything that brought you there? again, our fixation on the winner and the loser and the tentpole moments, I call them, is like moments that are supposed to be life defining, as if in like 5 minutes, that 5 minutes is worth more than everything else that you've done, causes us to just not value everything that's happened and all the strength that brought you all the other parts. What is the lesson about giving feedback that you wish you had learned earlier or less painfully?
Ooh, that the more you do it, the easier it gets. My role here is often reminding people that feedback is not a punitive thing. It's that I care enough about this person, their development, their career, to give them a perspective that they may not have. I really, really wish I had absorbed that lesson earlier in my career. If I could talk to 25-year-old Hannah, I would say, these people might actually have a point. And everybody's always learning something new about feedback, taking it in, critically evaluating it, deciding how much it's worth, what value you should ascribe to it. And I think that if I had come at feedback conversations as the recipient from a place of true openness and reception, it might not have taken me as long to learn some of the things that I now know. And that does actually help me in teaching other people about feedback. Because I remember and I know very well what it's like to kind of be the person at the other end of the "can I have 5 minutes" conversation. So we've actually just completed some effective feedback training for our leaders at our organization. It was not 3 weeks ago. And there was a lot of skepticism in the room and a lot of like side-eyeing each other because there were some direct reporting lines in the workshops. But by the end of it, the feedback I got on the feedback meta was, this is a really great conversation to start, and I hope it continues. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of power in just calling it out and saying what's in the room. Like, we hold this whether or not we share it, and we're preventing people from developing by not sharing it, or worse, sharing it with a third party and creating these like back channel conversations. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of honesty if it comes from a place of love.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Because there's another question here about how do you deal with feedback when you're dealing with the person's response in the moment. So what about that factor that, like the punch in the face, people will receive or feel like you're in this moment where they're taking a punch? How do you navigate that feeling that the person's having, but not choose to just not give the feedback because you know how that's likely the first response is going to feel like it was a gut punch or a jaw punch?
I really try to set out my stall ahead of time. I like also to approach it from a coaching place of asking that person questions that maybe lead them to discussing it, or to being able to be more self-aware and provide themselves with the feedback. Sort of hitting somebody with a frying pan, like, bam, there's your feedback. Mm-hmm. Not always effective. People's defenses are going to go up. Mm-hmm. Knowing where they're at, asking them, a really simple question, and not a manipulating thing. It's sort of like, how's your day going? Mm-hmm. Do you have a moment to review this thing? It's something I noticed, and I wanted to share some feedback with you. And instantly, it's the way you say it. It's your body language. It's where, we don't have a lot of private space in our modern open plan offices. But having set out deliberately to give the feedback, and honestly, repetition, the more the better. My colleague Benita will say, we adopt a take two. If it doesn't take the first time, no pressure. Teaching leaders how to give feedback, the first thing you see is like deer in the headlights, like, oh God, what if I screw this up? And the answer is, well, do it again. This isn't your only opportunity. And if it's going awry, or if you see that person just completely shutting down, you can always press pause and say, hey, I don't know if this is the right time to have this conversation. You seem like you're kind of not in a good spot for this. Can we meet up at the end of the day? Or just, and just keep it really casual. Feedback should be continuous. It should also be positive. I know everybody thinks of feedback as negative, but pulling somebody aside to say, like, that the way you handled that, like you kicked ass, keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of creating a bit of a balance between this is always going to be a difficult conversation to, oh, I'm curious about what this person actually thinks.
Yeah. Well, it's back to that idea. The paradigm is when you say to somebody, hey, I got a little feedback to share, it's usually negative. And
Yep.
so people's preparation, whether it's like putting up their mental gloves or their mental guards to protect from it, is this idea of like almost shielding your face from hearing. You're like shielding your body from getting the hit because you're assuming that that's what's coming. And so the openness is not there. I do think it's an interesting paradigm that we have, that we think successful feedback is the person popping right back up and thanking you and hugging you. And because we're so fixated about what it's going to feel like in the moment for them and for you, versus what is the purpose for feedback is for development and change in the future. So the actual thing that happens in the moment is really not at all important, whether they hug you and don't change or spit back in your face and do change.
Yeah.
But we see successful feedback as the person who seems really good about it in the moment, instead of fixating on what was the future state of that person later. Because if the future state of that later is that they took it in and they were able to develop and improve, does it really matter that in the moment they were kind of terrible about it? It's such an interesting thing, but we're like, no. Hanna took it super well. Okay, that actually doesn't mean anything. Or she was awful. I'll be like, well, let's see what happens in a month and then we'll know how Hanna took it. Because right now we just know those reactions that come from years of being nervous around these things. So that's really very helpful. Let's find something juicy in here. There's a lot of good things. Is boxing the scariest thing you've pushed yourself to do? Has it made you approach leadership in a different way?
Is boxing the scariest thing? I think by the time you're sitting backstage and waiting to get into that ring in front of everybody that you've ever known and loved, because it was broadcast on the internet, your adrenaline's going so high that like it would be scarier to not get in the ring, because then you'd chicken out, right? So you just have to jump in. I don't know. I think fear is relative. I moved away from Canada when I was 20 years old, and I started a new life in the UK, and I didn't think anything about it. And then I was actually more scared to come home 10 years later. In the moment, yeah, it was pretty terrifying. But I think that I've actually been more scared of some difficult conversations I've had to have in my life, and some big changes that I've had to make. Again, I knew that it was going to be 3 minutes in the ring. Worst case scenario, 3 minutes is not good. It goes by like that. You feel simultaneously like it's the longest time in your life, and that like the bell went before you even realized what was going on. So I guess the second half of that is, how has it affected my, sorry, Des, I think we scrolled away from it.
Sorry. Yes, over here. I'm coming back to it. Has it made you approach leadership in a different way?
It certainly forced me to think a lot about vulnerability and how everybody shows vulnerability in different ways. There were people that I trained alongside in the gym who were convinced of their supremacy, and they were going to move into that ring, and they were going to take the belt, and life was going to be great. And they got knocked down. They got knocked out. You see people whose vulnerability, they don't wear it, but they're wearing a very thin shield, and you can see through it. Mm-hmm. So approaching people where they're at, and recognizing through empathy and through an understanding that everybody's going to come at their own pace. Leadership for me is about getting the best out of your team, whether it's an organization or a sports team, and it's letting people play to their strengths, and encouraging them to lean into those. Mm-hmm. So seeing what people are capable of by giving them a little bit of space, and my own sort of leadership or even management style is really like, do what you're going to do, and call me if you need help. Like I'm the opposite of a micromanager. Mm-hmm. I don't like to be micromanaged, so maybe that's a little bit of a sort of like a projection. But when I'm asking somebody to do something, or when I'm leading an organization, I I do think a little bit about fear and its relationship to vulnerability, and how you have to create safety for people to open up sometimes. The industry that I work in now is hospitality, it's music production, it's live festival production. It's pretty historically a macho culture. So you see a lot of bravado. You see a lot of, yeah, no, we got this. And then just asking a simple question like, okay, well, how? And then you start to see the, oh, right, yeah, I have to be able to explain this to other people. I have to be able to, create the knowledge base that's beyond me. And so you start to see fear. You start to see people who are, unsure about how to do the thing that they're about to do next. And you got to give them the space to feel that and to start asking questions and start asking for help.
That's a really great. So I think our last question here, because it leads into this macho bravado, is I'd love to hear more about how to capitalize on being a strong woman leader in an organization of men, all kinds, right? Anyone?
Yeah.
There are a lot of women in leadership approaches. There are a lot of women in leadership approaches and courses, but this seems different. So,
we talked about that this session was about leading through authenticity, leading in authenticity. I'm the same person at home, hanging out with my family, hanging out with my friends, that I am at the office. And I recognize the privilege I have in being that. I've worked in organizations where everybody had to put a mask on and not swear. I've done really well by not swearing on this. But I think people can see your light, your soul, your whatever you want to call it coming through. Whether you are a woman or a man or door number 3, from whatever background. I think being aware of who I am and walking into the room like I belong there. I don't wear a particular hat about that. Sometimes I have maybe a very historical HR approach to something, and sometimes I'm, it's been noted like, wow, that was that was an ice cold response, and I'm like, I'm just being me, guys. I think that, I don't want to in any way diminish the challenges that we have in the world as women. I stand on the shoulders of generations and generations of tough and resilient women who have fought for the right to have the kind of job that I have now. I also want to recognize that there are lots of very supportive and egalitarian workplaces and teams that I have enjoyed being a part of, and this one is included. I feel heard. I've earned that right by knowing my stuff. And really putting your, sitting down at the table like you have a place there. This isn't about faking it until you make it. Like, you're there for a reason. I don't know. It's such a broad thing because everybody's experience is so unique. But when I decided that my role to play was to provide that voice, that they'd asked me to be there because they knew that it was missing, things got a lot easier. Difficult conversations, controversial opinions, hey, but what ifs, scenario planning. We've been obviously talking a lot about, how the hospitality industry is going to fare through this whole COVID-19 thing. Asking the difficult questions got easier because I started with asking slightly less difficult questions and realizing that they were appreciated. So starting small and building up, and then knowing which hills I want to die on during any given day or week. That everybody has to have their own value system and bring that. And I don't think that that's necessarily a gendered thing. That's a human thing.
Those are like, so I have to say, just in that last 2 minutes, so many interestingly great points about, just getting yourself used to having a bit of a disruptive voice, used to what it feels like, used to weathering through a perceived moment of rejection for being a little bit different or yourself. And then through that, building your confidence over time. It is like training. You know, you didn't get into that ring before you trained. I think a lot of people get into stuff before they've really thought it through. And then that's how they measure their success. I just wanted to shout out before we end David's comment here in the chat, which I think is great. Each person brings their mindset of the consequences of feedback to the conversation, rarely the same as the person who is providing the feedback. So true. It's like you're going to receive it where you're at, and the other person's delivering it where they're at. And somehow the whole thing is supposed to come out with a mutually beneficial exchange. And I still think that won't happen in 2 seconds. You build to that as well, through building trusting relationships and through having a consistent bond with a person that allows you to have that. I'm sure when you went in with your friend Sarah, I believe, you knew who she was before you went in there.
Yeah.
Right, and you knew that she was a good person.
The girl in the ring when I got in there, she definitely had her game face on.
Well, that's it. But you have respect for that person; they have respect for you, and I think that that's something that in our adversarial culture we don't often feel that way.
Yeah.
And if we feel deeply respected and respectful, the conversation is very different.
Totally.
I want to thank everybody who participated today. I want to thank you, Hanna, so much for being here. Thank you for weathering through rapping and snoring pugs. And just thank you so much for sharing this today. Wonderfully timed for International Women's Day. And again, I just love that quote. You know, I think it is a Mike Tyson quote. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Hanna.
Thank you so much, Des.
All right, take care. Thank you, everybody.
Hey.
Bye-bye.